Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today to introduce to you Scott Dacey, who is a Republican candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives for District 3. Scott, good to have you today.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Thank you for being here for the interview.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
We're delighted to have you here and delighted that our folks in Eastern North Carolina can learn more about you today. Why did you decide to run for Congress, Scott?
Well, you know, it's interesting. You spend time as a local elected official, and you spend time in your community working on behalf of the Republican Party, and then all of a sudden something happens that's very unique. And when President Trump made it through that election in November of 2016, it provided us with an opportunity that, candidly, many just didn't expect would happen again. They thought that this election for Hillary Clinton was going to be a foregone conclusion. And a couple months into his presidency, I started to recognize that there's something really important that's happening here. And I also started to notice that our current Congressman, Walter Jones, just simply wasn't doing all that he could to support President Trump and his agenda. So after a great deal of thought, discussions with my wife, prayer with our family, we came to the conclusion that it was the important thing to do, not just for ourselves, but for all of Eastern North Carolina.
Of course.
And so that's why we decided to make this move.
Okay. So you talk about the Trump agenda. You just mentioned the presidential election and President Trump winning that over Hillary Clinton. We wonder, what are those issues and why should the people of Eastern North Carolina be concerned about the way Walter Jones has voted on these issues?
Certainly. When we think about the Trump agenda, we think of, first of all, a guy who's been a tremendous entrepreneur, who's worked hard all of his life, who's earned a great deal of money, but has also given back considerably to the communities in which he's lived. I think that those are fundamental aspects of what make up the Trump agenda. When you've got a health care law that is burdening businesses all over America in Obamacare.
Right.
When you've got laws that are on the books that have stretched the banking industry to no end, have made it so difficult for those people that have modest means to even purchase and own a home today because of the Dodd-Frank legislation. When you've got the wall that many people believe needs to be built, and when you've got a tax reform bill that you recognize can provide people with more money in their own pocket that they've worked hard to earn, when you've got these sorts of issues that are the underpinnings of what I believe is the Trump agenda, but yet when you've got a congressman that represents the district that voted by over 23 points in favor of Donald Trump, and that congressman votes against not just one of those issues, but all of them. To me, that speaks volumes about where we're headed and whether or not our representation is indeed maybe just out of alignment with where our values are as a community.
Right, absolutely. So Scott, tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and what brought you to North Carolina?
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin. Grew up largely with my grandparents. My grandfather was a police officer in a community just outside of Milwaukee. And his wife, my grandmother, was a stay-at-home mom all of her life. And my mom got divorced from my father when I was quite young, and I didn't have an opportunity to meet him until I was about 19 years old. So not unlike a lot of families today, unfortunately, but you know, in the 60s and the 70s, that was probably a little bit different.
Right.
And really got tremendous values from my grandfather, who was, as I said, a police officer and a detective. He was in charge of the juvenile division. And so whenever I'd get a little bit out of line, he knew exactly how to straighten me out. And from that, I also got great respect for institutions and law enforcement, you know, chief among them. I also, you know, obviously went through education, high school and on to college at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. While I was there, I was very involved in student government and started to really appreciate the institution of government more for what it does and can assist people. Ultimately, I became the student body president for the 160,000 students of the UW system and had a great opportunity, went to go work for the legislature shortly after graduating from college. And then in 1989 had the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. to serve in the Bush administration, the administration of who we refer to as 41, George H.W. Bush. And the political job that they gave me over there was to work at the Small Business Administration. And it was a tremendous opportunity, great learning experience. And moved to Washington, D.C. and ended up meeting a lovely woman originally from North Carolina. After 9/11, we ended up moving back to North Carolina for her to be nearer to her family and for us to raise our children in a community that we would just love to have them be exposed to, and it's been a tremendous place for us to live.
That's fantastic. Have you been really involved in the Republican Party, Scott, ever since you first moved to North Carolina? Was that something that you just jumped right in and got involved with?
Well, yeah, actually, my activism in the Republican Party predates my trip to my move to North Carolina by many, many years.
Right.
You know, I get teased, or I was teased a lot. You know, you had that Alex P. Keaton sort of kid,
Right.
and that's maybe a little bit about what I was like.
Right.
A bit more serious than most, and always believed greatly, as I said, in institutions, and wanting to make certain that people are treated fairly generally. I've always believed in that, and that, you know, we don't necessarily all deserve anything,
Right.
but we all should have an opportunity to succeed on our own basis.
Right.
And that's just, to me, the fundamental part of being a Republican, to be able to work hard, to understand that the work that I engage in, I'm going to benefit from personally, and I will be able to then in turn take those benefits and help out the greater community. And so throughout my tenure, obviously, as I worked in the Bush administration, was very active in politics then. When I lived in Northern Virginia, very active in politics then, and then moved to North Carolina and got involved at the grassroots level as the guy that's the person that's going to go to precinct meetings.
Absolutely.
And then ultimately became the precinct chairman and became the treasurer of the county party and the vice chairman of the county party and the acting chairman of the county party, and the guy that then became the finance chairman for the North Carolina Republican Party. So my activism in the Republican Party has been long and deep, and along that way, I've had the pleasure and honor of supporting every single Republican president that we have had as our nominee.
Right.
It's not one of these things where I pick and choose and, well, this guy's okay or that guy's okay.
Right.
If we've got a nominee, I've been there to be supportive of him, and exactly as I was with Donald Trump after he was nominated.
Right.
And even before so, I went to the convention and I was in the stands in Cleveland, you know, cheering him on. And I thought that he was a tremendous showman, and he has brought great talent to the presidency. So, yes, my activity in the Republican Party has been quite long.
It sounds like you've been very involved. I think it sounds as if your time in D.C. Probably really helped you reassure your feeling and getting a calling, so to speak, for wanting to do this and be involved in politics, and coming back to North Carolina and being very involved. It sounds like in all of your years here, you have had an active voice in what has been happening with the party, and obviously you've served in various positions with the Republican Party. You've been a county commissioner in Craven County since 2010. Could you share with us how that role may have prepared you in any way for serving in Congress?
Well, certainly. It's been a tremendous honor to have the responsibility to represent a good portion of the people of Craven County in the district that I represent, which encompasses all of Trent Woods, all of Riverbend, and about a third of the city of New Bern.
Okay.
And while that's my constituency, of course, we all try to represent the entire county. Any county commissioner tries to do that, I think. And it's been a tremendous opportunity to learn. Specifically, I've served on a number of boards and commissions while serving on the board itself, including Allies for Cherry Point Tomorrow, which has had responsibility in working to defend the base, the Cherry Point Marine Corps Air Station, and the Fleet Readiness Center, which is there.
Yes.
Those two facilities are the largest employer in Craven County, and indeed 38% of our employment base in Craven County is directly tied to that base.
Okay.
So it became very clear to me early on when the Obama administration was talking about instituting a base realignment and closure that we needed to spend a lot of time focused in on our military activities.
Absolutely, right.
And I've got to say that it was probably at that point in time that I noticed my first concern for Congressman Jones and the way in which he was conducting himself as a congressman. There just didn't seem to be that much interest and desire to be on the front lines in providing the defense for us. It also manifested itself when we had a hurricane that rolled through. I would hear from Senator Burr and Senator Hagan, but we didn't hear anything from our congressman. And over time, even though I had been a very staunch supporter of the congressman for years beforehand, you know, going to different conventions and speaking on his behalf, I know you've maybe done the same sort of thing for elected officials. But I started to then recognize that maybe our congressman just wasn't doing what we expected or that we thought he was doing. What he was telling us he was doing, was he actually doing that up in Washington, D.C.?
Okay.
And over a period of time, being involved in that issue and now deeply with the opioid issue that we've got in our community, I've started to just recognize that he's not showing up. And unfortunately, the statistics bear truth to that. He misses more votes than any member within our congressional delegation here in North Carolina. And in fact, he's within the top 10% in missing votes of the folks in all of Congress. And it seems to me, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you need to show up to work. If we're going to pay the congressman $174,000 a year, they need to be there to represent our interests in Congress. And as your congressman, I will do exactly that. Okay,
absolutely. So Scott, much is being made of your background as a lobbyist. You mentioned your time in Washington, working with the Bush administration, of course, and I think that many of us who have come to know you in Eastern North Carolina have learned a little bit about your background as a lobbyist, but I think everyone would be interested in hearing more about that. So could you tell us a little bit about your work?
Well, certainly, Melissa. As I mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. to work in the Bush administration, and the job that I was assigned was to do the congressional affairs work for the agency. So that gave me a wonderful opportunity to understand how government truly worked from inside the administrative side of the activities. It provided me with an opportunity to go to Capitol Hill on a fairly regular basis to help brief members of Congress about the various policy issues, making certain that we had the correct people from inside the agency meeting with the people up on the Hill so that we get good information to the Capitol. One of the other projects that they asked me to work on was implementing a law that had passed in just the previous year, which provided new economic development benefits for Indian tribal governments across the United States. As you may know, Indian tribal reservations have been really neglected for many, many decades. And the previous administration had come up to the point where the Reagan administration, they had said that they wanted to make certain that there were more economic opportunities, job opportunities, educational opportunities on Indian reservations. And I will tell you that it opened up an entirely new door for me that I had never expected. And so for the last 28 years, I've had the pleasure of working on behalf of Indian tribes, the governments themselves, not the casinos as people are trying to make out, but the governments themselves, and helping to represent their interests before Congress. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution specifically describes the relationship between federally recognized tribes and the United States, and it speaks to the fact that it should be Congress that will dictate that relationship between the United States and the Indian tribes. So on behalf of the tribal governments that I represent, I work with members of Congress, largely Republicans, in the House and the Senate, to help them understand what's going on the reservations, what the needs may be, and how the constitutional responsibility can be fulfilled. And through that, it's given me a tremendous opportunity to learn more about Congress, to see how different communities are treated. Working with the Indian tribes, of course, is just like working with sometimes a very small local unit of government. And so my work as a county commissioner and my work on behalf of the Indian tribes is not all that dissimilar. And so, in fact, I've been able to utilize the knowledge that I have about Congress to the work that I've done as county commissioner. And I think the people of Craven County have benefited greatly by that. I can certainly say that the knowledge that I've been able to bring forward while serving in a support role to help defend Allies for Cherry Point and the Marine Corps Air Station that we've got has helped out greatly in making certain that that base is protected. And I would argue that that relationship and the understanding that I have of Congress will help me on day one to be a more effective advocate for the people of Eastern North Carolina, and for that matter, for President Trump in working to get his agenda through Congress.
Right, absolutely. I can definitely see that connection from the lobbying background to the county commissioner background, and those seem to certainly go hand in hand. So I can see how that would certainly be an asset. So another question that we would have for you, Scott, we know that Walter Jones has now stated publicly that this would be his last year, his last run for Congress. Given this statement, why is it important the voters would change their representation in Congress now rather than wait for Congressman Jones to retire?
Well, it is interesting. He's somewhat made a bit of a splash about this over the last couple of weeks, and that's good. I'm glad that he's making the public aware of what his intentions are. Of course, when he first decided to run for office, he also told the people that he was going to serve 3 terms and then no longer serve in Congress.
Right.
Well, he's now going into his 13th term, or at least that's what his hope is.
Right.
So I think that we do have to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, but nonetheless, we've got 2 years left in the Trump administration. Congressman Jones has the worst voting record of all Republicans voting on matters of the Trump agenda. If our congressman coming from a district that has voted so overwhelmingly in favor of President Trump turns his back on the desires of his constituents, we can't afford to wait another 2 years.
Right.
This decision and this change needs to be made now.
Right.
Additionally, Congressman Jones has got the most he's the most likely Republican to vote with Nancy Pelosi, voting against the Republicans that he serves with. So between those two facts, I think that we all have to recognize that something's got to change here.
Right.
So we've got that, just from his performance perspective, that is a concern to me. Second, when I spoke earlier of the base realignment and closure, the Trump administration has decided that they're not going to move forward with a base realignment and closure process. And when you've got a congressional district that's got both Cherry Point and Lejeune in it, the military is a very, very important factor. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to toss the issue to Congress, and they're going to say, Congress, we want you to decide what assets should be shut down or expanded.
Okay.
I believe that we've got to get a head start on that question immediately. Right. So it is imperative that we've got a congressman that will be able to get their arms around this issue. So in the coming years, we're going to be able to not just defend the military assets that we've got here, but also when things are peeled away in other communities, that we are in a great place to pick up mission so that we can have a stronger employment opportunity base for the people that live here in Eastern North Carolina.
Right.
Finally, I guess I don't believe that anybody's entitled to serve as a member of Congress. Just because your father may have served for 24 or 26 years and you've served for 24 years, that you should be given another 2-year term simply because you believe that you're owed it.
Right.
Nobody is owed anything in this world. We can work hard for things, but I'm not all up for just giving the congressman his last 2 years just because he says it's his last.
Absolutely. So, Scott, I know many that are watching may be wondering, how could they possibly get involved in your campaign? And then also, is there a website that we could send our viewers to take a look at your website, stay up to date on issues? Because obviously things change daily with Congress, things change daily with the administration of the president, and I would think that people are very interested in your views in those areas. So how could we best address those and send people to your website to take a look?
Certainly. Well, all the things that I've just talked about throughout this interview are all things that are found on our website. They're all cited. All the publications that I've drawn from in order to come to the conclusions to help educate the voters are all up on the website. Okay. And you've got 2 to choose from. You've got the first one, electdacey.com.
Okay.
And that goes through a lot of biographical information on me, on the issues in which I'm running on. It has got a nice little video that talks about why it is that we're doing this as a family. And then we've got a second website, which is daceytrump.com, which really explores the whole question as to what level of support Congressman Jones is giving to President Trump in his agenda. And so you'll find a bit more information there, a little bit more information about how it is that Walter Jones is actually siding with Nancy Pelosi more than any other Republican in the House of Representatives. And I would also, just get involved. You're going to see opportunities to register your own participation, and you'll sign up for emails, and we will send those things out from time to time to kind of update people as to what's going on with the campaign and what some of the new issues are.
Fantastic. And I know with District 3, you are covering a lot of counties.
Yes.
There's a lot of counties involved in District 3. If there are individuals who would like to be involved in the campaign in various counties throughout the district, how could they contact you, or who should they get in contact with for that?
Certainly. They're welcome to get in touch with me through my email account at S as in Scott, C as in Charles, last name Dacey, D-A-C-E-Y, at gmail.com. Okay. Also, as I mentioned, go up on the website. And then finally, take advantage of Facebook. We've got a very active Facebook presence. You can just go ahead and search for Scott Dacey for Congress, and it'll pop right up. Okay. And we've got a very active presence there. We've got people that are monitoring it all the time. And that's actually probably the best way to get engaged, and then we will respond very quickly.
Okay, that is fantastic. Well, again, we thank you very much for your time, Scott. Thank you for being here this afternoon, for sharing your views and answering some of these questions that I know many of the viewers are very interested in finding out and getting to know you better. I would like to ask you, as we close, remind us the date of the primary, which is coming up.
Absolutely. Very important question here for us.
Right.
The early voting will start on April the 19th.
Okay.
And the primary itself is on May the 8th.
Okay.
So you'll be able to vote from the 19th until, I guess, about the 6th, or the 5th, that Saturday just preceding the election day.
Okay.
And then we'd, of course, hope that you show up. If you've not yet voted by then, show up on election day.
Absolutely.
And, of course, the 3rd Congressional District is made up of 17 counties. We've got a beautiful map. All the counties are complete counties except for Pitt County.
Okay.
And so you do have to check a little bit for there, but if you live south of the Tar River, you pretty much are in the 3rd Congressional District.
Okay. And so they can actually go to your website, get a look at that map, and identify, making sure that they are in the district, and get instructions from there. Well, thank you again so much, Scott. It's been very informative. Pleasure to have you in Greenville and have you addressing the great folks of Greenville and Pitt County. So again, we were very pleased to have Scott Dacey with us today. Scott is Republican candidate for U.S. House of Representatives for District 3. Thank you.
Thank you.